The aroma of stale coffee and sizzling bacon usually signaled a peaceful Tuesday morning at Harold's diner. But today, the silence was thick with an unspoken tension, an undercurrent that promised trouble. Raymond "Ray" Wilson, a man in his late 50s with eyes that had seen too much but held an unwavering calm, sat in his usual booth by the window. His olive-green military jacket, though faded and bearing the marks of countless patrols, was meticulously clean. His trimmed beard, flecked with gray, framed a face that spoke of quiet resilience. Ray didn't speak much, but when he did, his words carried the weight of experience. "Morning, Carla," he greeted the bustling waitress, a young woman in her early 30s who ran the floor with the practiced efficiency of a seasoned drill sergeant. "Any of that peach cobbler today?" She laughed. "Not until lunch, Mr. Ray." "Your usual?" He nodded, a silent acknowledgement of their long-standing ritual: scrambled eggs, grits, bacon, and coffee, black. From behind the counter, Harold, the diner's owner, watched Ray with a knowing glance. "That man's got more integrity in his little finger than most folks twice his size," he'd once confided to Carla. She wholeheartedly agreed. To most casual observers, Ray appeared unassuming, perhaps even down on his luck. No fancy car, no obvious display of wealth. But to Harold and Carla, he was family, a pillar of quiet strength and unwavering respect. Ray sipped his coffee, his gaze drifting to the small television mounted above the counter. A news report flickered across the screen, detailing struggles veterans faced in accessing their benefits. He exhaled slowly, a ghost of a shadow crossing his face, then returned to the morning traffic outside. Students hurried to Mercer, parents dropped off kids, and workers sped toward Robins Air Force Base. No one noticed the sleek black and white cruiser pulling up to the curb. Two officers emerged, moving with an air of practiced authority. Officer Langley, a burly man who still carried himself like a collegiate athlete, led the way. Behind him, Officer Reese, compact and square-faced, clutched a clipboard. They entered, their eyes immediately scanning the diner, eventually locking onto Ray. "Sir," Langley announced, his voice devoid of courtesy, striding directly towards Ray's booth. "Are you a paying customer here?" Ray blinked slowly, a deliberate nod his only response. "I am." Reese, eyes narrowed, chimed in, "Did you purchase anything?" "Got a receipt?" Carla stepped forward, her voice firm. "He's fine, officers. He's here every Tuesday. Always pays cash." Langley cut her off with a dismissive wave. "I wasn't addressing you, ma'am." Harold emerged from behind the counter, a quiet caution in his voice. "Don't, Carla." Ray remained still, his composure unyielding. "I paid." She took the order. "You can ask her." Reese's gaze was piercing. "ID? You carrying identification?" Ray reached into his worn military jacket, his movements slow and deliberate. He pulled out an old leather wallet, its edges cracked with age, and slid a Veterans Affairs, VA, card across the table. Langley snatched it, scoffing. "This is all you've got?" Ray met his gaze evenly. "It's all I need." Reese let out a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, we'll see." The air in the diner grew heavy, thick with an unspoken threat. Everyone sensed it, that unsettling pressure that precedes something truly bad. Reese leaned in closer, his arms crossed, scrutinizing Ray as if preparing for a mugshot. "How long have you been here?" Ray glanced at the wall clock. "About 30 minutes. Langley tilted his head, a predatory glint in his eyes. "And how long do you plan on staying?" Ray's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained as steady as ever. "Long enough to eat my breakfast, like everyone else." Carla swiftly, but gently, placed Ray's plate on the table. "Here you go, Mr. Wilson." Langley raised an eyebrow. "He's already ordered." Carla didn't back down. "He comes in every Tuesday, sir. Pays cash. Always polite. He's a regular." Reese turned back to Ray. You're homeless, aren't you? Ray nodded slowly. I don't have a house. No. But I have a home in this town. Langley smirked. Got smart answers, huh? Ray said nothing. He picked up his fork, as if the simple act of eating might make them disappear, but it didn't. You see, this is the problem, Langley declared, scanning the room as if addressing a bewildered crowd. People think they can just camp out wherever they want. Take advantage of kind folks like yourselves. Is that fair to everyone else in here? No one dared to answer. A couple at a nearby table stared intently at their plates. A delivery driver shifted uncomfortably near the door. The diner was a theater of silent, simmering resentment. Ray cut a piece of egg, chewed, swallowed, and calmly wiped his mouth with his napkin. I served in Iraq twice, in classified operations you'll never hear about. Came back, worked security until my knees gave out from years of carrying heavy packs. I get by. I don't steal. I don't beg. I pay for my food. So why are you talking to me like I broke into someone's house? Langley chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. Relax. Just doing our job, making sure everything's in order. Carla stepped forward again, her eyes blazing. Then check the register. He paid. I rang him up. What else do you need? Langley ignored her, turning back to Reese. Name? Reese prompted, notepad ready. Ray raised an eyebrow. It's on the card. I asked for your name out loud, Reese repeated, irritation creeping into his tone. Raymond Wilson, Ray replied, his voice flat. Date of birth? February 10, 1968. Langley gestured to Reese. Run it. Reese headed back to the cruiser, muttering under his breath. Harold finally stepped out from behind the counter, drying his hands on a towel. Officers, he began, his voice firmer now. Can I speak to you outside for a moment? Langley waved him off. We're good, sir. No, you're not, Harold retorted, his gaze unwavering. That man has never caused trouble in my business. Do you have an actual reason to be here, or are we just harassing veterans now? Langley's face tightened. Sir, we're responding to a complaint. Harold frowned. From who? Langley offered no reply, simply shifting his weight and watching Ray, clearly hoping he'd make a mistake. Ray finished his toast and gently pushed his plate forward. He wiped his hands, then reached into his jacket pocket again. This time, he pulled out a scratched, old flip phone, the kind only someone like him would still carry. What's that? Langley demanded, his voice edged with unease. Ray flipped the phone open with one hand, pressed a speed dial number, and waited. Harold leaned in. Raymond, but Ray simply raised a single finger as the line clicked. He brought the phone to his ear. A pause. Then, in a voice as calm as a still lake, he said, It's happening again. The silence that followed was deafening, rattling the windows. No one knew what the call meant, but its gravity hung in the air. Langley's eyes narrowed, fixed on Ray as if he'd just pulled the pin on a grenade. Who the hell did you just call? Ray didn't flinch, didn't answer. Instead, he calmly closed the flip phone, placed it next to his plate, and leaned back. You said you were just doing your job, Ray said, his voice low and steady. Now I'm doing mine. Langley puffed out his chest, hands on his duty belt. Sir, I'm going to need you to stand up and come outside with me. Harold stepped forward, his resolve firm. No, he's not going anywhere. Not unless you're arresting him. Reese returned from the patrol car, a tablet in hand. Name checks out, he muttered, scrolling. VA database confirms veteran status. Honorable discharge, 2 tours, Bronze Star. Langley didn't even blink. He's homeless. Yeah, no fixed address. Was cited last year in Albany for loitering. Langley nodded, as if that was all the confirmation he needed. Then he's a drifter. Doesn't belong sitting here all day taking up space. Carla slammed her notepad onto the counter. You've got regulars who sit here for hours sipping 1 cup of coffee, and nobody says a word. But you come in here and go after the one man who actually earned that right. Langley turned to her, pointing. Ma'am, I'd advise you to step back. You don't get to advise me in my own workplace, she snapped. Ray remained seated, calm, still. Only his fingers, drumming the edge of the table once, twice, 3 times, betrayed his weariness. He didn't look angry, just profoundly tired. You see me as a problem, he said to Langley, his voice soft but unwavering. But I'm not the one making a scene. Langley finally snapped. That's it. Stand up now. Ray slowly rose to his feet, taller than he seemed when sitting, straighter too. He met Langley's gaze. I don't want trouble. Langley reached for his cuffs. You should have thought about that before you got clever. Before he could grab Ray's wrist, the diner door swung open, not jingling but slapping loudly against the wall. A man in his mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a navy suit and dark overcoat, strode purposefully towards their table. No badge was visible, yet authority emanated from his every step. He held up a black leather ID case. Assistant Director Mark Sorrell, Department of Justice. Langley froze, his hand still hovering near his cuffs. Sorrell's voice was crisp, calm, and chillingly precise. Officers, I'm going to need your badge numbers now. Reese stammered, sir, we were just responding to there was no complaint, Sorrell cut in, his eyes fixed on the officers. We monitor certain keywords on open radio lines. You're both recorded. Both of you were violating departmental protocol the moment you started questioning a civilian without cause. This man is a veteran, not a suspect. Langley's face flushed crimson. With all due respect, you're not our supervisor. No, Sorrell replied, his voice laced with quiet menace. I'm your investigation. Ray, witnessing the unfolding drama, simply sat back down, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. Harold exhaled a long, deep breath. Carla's eyes were wide, darting between the men as if watching a live courtroom drama. Langley glanced around the room, the grim realization dawning that everyone had heard, everyone had seen. And then he remembered the body cam still rolling on Reese's chest. What it had captured was more than enough to change everything. Sorrell didn't sit, didn't smile, didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. I suggest you both step outside now. Langley and Reese hesitated, like children caught red-handed. Eventually, they walked out, heads down, shoulders slumped, without another word. The diner remained quiet, but it was a watchful silence. Ray reached for his coffee, still warm. Sorrell remained standing beside the booth, hands clasped behind his back. He leaned in slightly, his voice low, for Ray's ears alone. You all right? Ray nodded. Didn't want to call you. I know, Sorrell replied. But you were right to. Carla, finally finding her voice, whispered, wait, what just happened? Who is he? Ray glanced up at her, a faint smile playing on his lips. Friend from the old days. Harold crossed his arms, his brow furrowed. You got friends who walk in with a DOJ badge and shut down cops mid-complaint? Ray gave a barely perceptible shrug. Depends on the complaint. Sorrell turned to Carla and Harold. I apologize for the disruption. We won't be long. I need a few minutes with Mr. Wilson. Harold nodded, still reeling. Say what you need. Coffee's on the house. Ray shook his head. Put it on me. I always pay. Carla offered him a small, knowing smile. Of course you do, Mr. Ray. Sorrell sat across from him, his tone shifting. Less official now, like he was talking to an old war buddy, which he was. You sure you're okay, Ray? Ray shrugged, a flicker of weariness in his eyes. I've had worse mornings, but I've had better, too. Sorrel's gaze sharpened. This is the third time this year, Ray. Yeah. Ray's voice was flat. You want me to push this up the chain? Ray didn't answer right away, meticulously folding his napkin and placing it beside his empty plate. Do what you got to do. I'm tired of explaining myself to people who already made up their minds. Sorrel nodded gravely. You shouldn't have to. Not after what you gave up for this country. Ray's face hardened for a fleeting second. They only care about that when I'm in uniform. Not when I'm sitting in a diner trying to eat. Sorrel sighed. They'll be suspended at the very least. Ray looked at him, calm and steady. I don't want apologies. I want respect. I want them to learn something that sticks. Sorrel pulled out his phone. The body cam footage will be flagged and reviewed today. You'll get an official call from Internal Affairs. Probably 2 interviews. Then we'll notify the press. Ray didn't flinch. Let them see it. Maybe next time they'll think twice. Outside the diner window, Reese paced by the patrol car, arms crossed. Langley was on his phone, his face a stormy mix of anger and pallor. Inside, Carla was back to refilling coffee cups, but every few seconds, her eyes flicked to Ray. She'd never seen this side of him. No one here had. And that's the thing about people like Ray. They don't brag. They don't yell. They just carry more than most. In silence, Sorrel rose. He placed a business card face down on the table. You call that number if anyone else tries anything. You understand me? Ray nodded. I appreciate you, Mark. Sorrel paused, looking him in the eye. The people that matter do, Ray. But outside, something's brewing. And what you don't know yet is that the worst is still coming. And it's not from the officers. It's from the internet. 2 hours later, the diner was back to its usual rhythm. Coffee cups clinked, forks scraped plates, and the low murmur of morning conversation hummed beneath the crackling radio near the register. But something subtle had shifted. It wasn't just that Ray was still sitting in the same booth. It was the way people glanced at him now, longer, curious, respectful, hesitant. Carla leaned in while refilling his coffee. You sure you want to stick around, Mr. Ray? You've got half the city whispering already. Ray shrugged. I didn't do anything wrong. Harold grunted from behind the counter. You didn't. But folks don't care about facts. They care about drama. Ray took a sip. Then they better bring their own cup. I'm not pouring it. That drew a small chuckle from Carla, but it didn't last long. The bell above the door jingled again. This time, it wasn't a cop, not a regular customer. It was a teenage girl in a hoodie and sweatpants, her phone seemingly glued to her hand. Are you him? She asked, stepping towards Ray's booth without hesitation. Ray looked up, confused. You're the guy from the video, right? The veteran at Harold's Diner? Ray frowned. How do you? It's all over TikTok, she interrupted, her voice buzzing with excitement. Somebody posted the body cam footage, tagged the location. It's everywhere. My brother's in college, and he saw it. Ray leaned back, his jaw tight. That was fast. Fast? She laughed, incredulous. You're trending, man. People are pissed. Those cops. Twitter's eating them alive. Harold walked over, his brow furrowed. Wait, who posted the footage? Don't know, the girl replied, scrolling furiously, but it's got over 400,000 views in like 2 hours. Carla put a hand on her hip. What exactly does the video show? The girl turned the screen. Here, look. On the tiny screen, Reese's body cam flickered to life. You could hear Langley demanding Ray's ID. You could hear Carla trying to speak up. You could see the exact moment Langley reached for his cuffs and then, Ray quietly pulling out his phone and making the call. Then Sorel's dramatic arrival. It played out like a scene in a movie. Ray looked away, his jaw clenched. He didn't like watching himself on screens. It felt like being peeled open in front of strangers. People are calling you a hero, the girl continued, like a silent warrior kind of hero. There's even a hashtag Raymond Wilson. Ray shook his head. I'm not a hero. You're not invisible anymore, she said softly, then turned and walked out as quickly as she'd come in. Carla pulled out her phone, tapped around, then looked at Ray. She's right. You're all over. There are articles popping up. Even a reporter from Savannah is asking for an interview. Ray sighed, running a hand over his face. That's not what I wanted. You sure? Harold asked, a glimmer of something hopeful in his eyes. Because maybe it's what we needed. People finally seeing what's been happening right under their noses. Ray didn't answer. He looked down at the VA card still sitting on the edge of the table. That little piece of plastic never got him a job. Never got him an apartment. Never even got him a thank you when he needed it most. But now it was viral content. And that felt complicated. But outside, behind the scenes, bigger forces were waking up. Because when the internet gets involved, stories don't just spread, they explode. By noon, Ray Wilson's name wasn't just floating around social media, it was running across the bottom of national news tickers. Local station WRBL picked up the footage, calling it another egregious example of unchecked authority. CNN ran a short segment before lunch. By evening, the video had been clipped, stitched, remixed, and dissected by every online pundit with a webcam and an opinion. People wanted to know who this quiet, steady man was, where he came from, what he'd been through, and how two local cops got so comfortable disrespecting a black veteran in broad daylight. They started digging, and that's when the truth about Raymond Wilson began to truly emerge. It began with an old, grainy, black and white photo, taken somewhere in Fallujah. Ray, younger, standing beside two other men in full combat gear, sand crusted on their uniforms, rifles slung over their shoulders, exhaustion etched in their eyes. The caption read, Operator Raymond Wilson, Task Force Wolfhound, 2006. The internet didn't know what Task Force Wolfhound was, so they dug deeper. Turns out it was a covert joint operations unit that specialized in highly classified hostage recovery missions, deep behind enemy lines. Most of their files were sealed, but veterans talked quietly, respectfully, and when one of them shared a redacted commendation letter addressed to Ray, dated 2007, the story broke wide open. This wasn't just some regular grunt. Raymond Wilson had saved people. Not once, not twice, dozens of times. There were no interviews with him on record. No medals hung on any wall. No speeches or ceremonies. Just a paper trail of quiet excellence hidden in silence. Back in the diner, Ray had no clue how far things had gone. He didn't do Twitter. Didn't care for TikTok. He was sitting in the same booth, flipping through a local newspaper that didn't even have the story yet. Sorel called again. You might want to prepare yourself, Ray, he said. For what? Ray asked, his voice calm. The phones are ringing off the hook. Congressional offices, newsrooms, a few big-name vets from DC want to shake your hand. Some nonprofit even wants to buy you a house. Ray blinked, incredulous. Buy me a house? Yeah, Sorel chuckled softly. You're the internet's newest hero. Ray laughed under his breath, a sound tinged with disbelief rather than joy. All I did was sit down for breakfast. No, Sorel corrected, you stood up without standing up. Ray looked out the window. The world felt like it was speeding up without asking if he wanted to come along. He didn't like being the center of attention. He'd spent years trying not to be noticed. But now strangers were turning him into a symbol, some for justice, some for contempt. Carla walked by and slid a small box onto the table. "Someone from the VA center dropped that off for you, Mr. Ray." Inside, a clean button-up shirt, a pair of new boots, a prepaid phone, and a note that simply read, "Thank you, Sergeant Wilson." Ray stared at it for a long moment. He didn't need gifts. He needed peace. But maybe this was the cost of forcing the world to look at something it had ignored for too long. "Harold," Ray said quietly, "you ever feel like people don't see you till it's too late?" Harold didn't look up from the register. "Only every damn day, Ray." But what Ray didn't know yet was that the video, his video, was about to force a conversation in places he never imagined, places that usually pretended men like him didn't exist. The video didn't fade like most trending clips. It grew. By Thursday morning, the Mon Police Department issued a formal statement: "We are conducting a full investigation into the incident involving Mr. Raymond Wilson." But the internet didn't want a statement. They wanted action. They wanted names, and they already had them. Within hours, Officer Reese deleted his social media accounts. Officer Langley tried to go private, but not before someone screenshotted his Facebook comments from years ago. Some of it was bad. Real bad. The kind of stuff that made you wonder how he ever wore a badge to begin with. Protesters gathered outside the department headquarters. Not thousands, not even hundreds, just enough to fill a sidewalk. A quiet line of folks holding signs that read, "I am Raymond Wilson." No chants, no screaming, just presence. That's all it took. Meanwhile, journalists began peeling back the layers. Turns out this wasn't Langley's first complaint for profiling, or even his fifth. There were reports filed and forgotten. Citizens who didn't know who to call, letters that never reached the right desk. But Ray did, and his one call knocked the entire tree down. At the diner, things had undeniably changed. Carla had been interviewed twice. Harold's photo was on a local blog. Customers showed up just to sit in the booth Ray was in. One guy even asked to take a selfie with the chair. Ray shook his head at it all. "I'm not an attraction," he mumbled. "You're a mirror," Carla replied, her voice soft. "People just don't like what they see when they look in." Still, Ray didn't feel like a hero. Heroes get rest. They get safe. He was still sleeping in the same shelter, still folding his jacket into a pillow at night, still stretching old pain out of his knees every morning. But something was different now. One evening, a van pulled up outside the shelter. Two men in suits got out and asked for Raymond Wilson. They handed him an envelope. Inside was a letter from the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. It apologized for how he'd been treated, offered an expedited housing voucher, a counselor, a caseworker, access to a therapist. "I didn't ask for this," Ray said, holding the letter like it was a complex riddle. "No, sir," the younger man said, his voice respectful. "But you earned it that night. You earned it for every veteran who went unnoticed." Ray didn't sleep much that night. He lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the men he'd served with who didn't make it back, who never got letters, who never went viral, who were just forgotten. By Friday, the officers were suspended. The mayor of Mon gave a press conference. The chief of police stumbled through an apology that sounded like it was written by lawyers, but it didn't matter much. Public pressure did what bureaucracy never could. Reese resigned. Langley refused, but with the investigation heating up and more old cases being re-examined, his badge was hanging by a thread. Even the union knew he was dead weight now. Ray watched it all unfold from a bench outside the shelter. There was a camera crew waiting nearby, but he wasn't interested. Not today. He lit a cigarette. He didn't usually smoke, but some days just called for it. An older woman walked by, recognized him, and paused. "Thank you," she said, her voice sincere. Ray didn't ask for what. He just nodded, because maybe, Finally, people were starting to understand something he'd known for years: respect isn't something you give to people like him out of pity. It's something they deserve. And if it took one phone call, one diner, and one bad morning to teach that lesson, so be it. But there was still one thing left to say, and Ray knew it wouldn't come from a press release or a protest. It had to come from him. The following Sunday morning, the diner was unusually quiet. No cameras, no news vans, just the regulars again. Locals who came for Harold's eggs and Carla's gossip, the ones who were here before the headlines and would be here long after they disappeared. Ray walked in wearing that same army jacket. But now his posture was different. Not stiff, not proud, just present. Like someone who knew exactly where he stood, even if the ground beneath him kept shifting. Harold nodded toward his usual booth. "It's open, Ray." Ray didn't sit. He cleared his throat, and for a moment, nobody noticed. Then Carla saw him. "Mr. Wilson," she said, setting down a tray. "I got something to say," Ray replied, his eyes scanning the room. The diner quieted. "I'm not a hero," he began, his voice steady. "I didn't plan to be a story. I came in for eggs and coffee, like always, like I have every Tuesday for years." He looked at Harold, then Carla. "Y'all saw me not as a problem, not as a project, but as a person." He turned to the others. "But some folks, they didn't. And maybe now that video got out, people are paying attention. That's good, but attention isn't the same as understanding." A few heads nodded slowly. One man lowered his fork. "See," Ray said, tapping his chest lightly, "I wore this jacket in the desert. I watched men I loved die in the dirt for a country that forgets us the moment we take off the uniform." His voice stayed even, calm, but every word hit like a hammer. "I didn't ask for praise. I asked for a seat. I didn't demand a parade. Just a plate. And still, I had to prove I belong." Ray stepped forward now, facing the room. "There are thousands like me. You won't see them on the news. You won't hear their names. Some are homeless. Some are working jobs with bad knees and broken backs. Some just stopped talking, 'cause they got tired of being invisible." He held up a hand. "But hear this, being poor isn't a crime. Being tired isn't a weakness. And asking to be treated like a human being should never be met with suspicion." Carla wiped her cheek, trying to make it look like she was just rubbing her eye. It didn't work. Ray smiled gently. "We all walk into places carrying stories no one sees. So the next time you see someone who looks like they don't belong, maybe they do. Maybe they belong more than you know." He nodded once and finally took his seat. Nobody clapped. Nobody needed to. Sometimes the truth is loudest when it's quiet. The rest of the morning, folks came and went. Some left cash on Ray's table without a word. One woman handed him a handwritten letter and walked away. Harold brought him another coffee without asking. That afternoon, Ray walked over to the shelter one last time. He packed his things. The apartment key from the VA was cold in his hand. Strange, heavy. Later that week, the first news story faded. Then the next. Social media found someone new to rage over. The world moved on, but Ray didn't. He planted roots in a neighborhood that saw him, in a place where people knocked on his door, not to question him, but to say hello. He started volunteering at a nearby school, speaking to kids about service, about silence, about dignity. The staff didn't quite know how to introduce him, so they didn't. They just said, "This is Mr. Wilson. You'll want to hear what he has to say." Because it turned out people listened now. But more importantly, they looked, and they saw. Let this story be a reminder. Not every hero wears a cape. Some wear jackets older than you. Some sit quietly with coffee. Some fight battles you'll never hear about. Respect doesn't come after you're gone. It should come while you're still here. So the next time you cross paths with someone who looks forgotten, speak. Don't stare. Listen. Don't assume. And when you can, stand up. Even if it's just by sitting down beside them. If this story moved you, please comment respect below, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more stories of unseen valor.